A question for both of you. We're talking about the patient, and that's always what we index towards. I think that's why we all stay in this industry. And with that, we also then quickly behind that say, well, in order for this procedure to see the light of day and become, platinum standard, best in class, the economics have to make sense. So first, Dr. Clair, to you, take this down range. How does this procedure impact the cost of healthcare longitudinally? You mentioned something earlier about people, not having to lose their limb, and then all of the care that goes with that, plus the pharmaceuticals involved and the follow-ups. So take me through that. How does this, from your clinician side, impact the cost of a patient and the burden on sort of our economy?
So I think most people think of amputation as you do the amputation and that's the end for the patient. But the bottom line is that amputation and the loss of an ability to ambulate often changes living situations, family situations, and the ability of an individual to take care of themselves. And so there's a huge cost to caring for these patients beyond that initial procedure. So if you can get these patients in and out of the hospital in a day or two with a percutaneous procedure and maintain their ability to function independently, there's a much lower downstream cost for these individuals to keep them functional. And that's really what the goal of this is to keep those individuals functional and keep the care expenses down for the patients and for our entire society. Because the cost of an amputation is not very expensive, but the cost of the amputation for the patient and society is incredibly expensive. You're talking of upwards of several $100,000 for the first year or two.
Dan?
Yeah, I mean, people don't, as Dr. Clair said, people think you cut it off and then they're walking on a prosthetic. I mean, more than half the patients with CLTI who get an amputation don't really go on to walk ever again, right? And there's some basic things that when you think about it, you understand. I mean, when you lose a limb, sitting up is harder because your center of gravity has changed, right? So just, being able to sit up off the couch, out of a chair, out of bed. If you lose both limbs, and many patients do end up losing both limbs, sitting up is almost impossible because you just don't have a counterweight. And that, along with rehab, loss of muscle mass, all these things come together to take a patient who is already suffering from chronic diseases beforehand to really a very steep downward slope of morbidity and mortality. And so that's what we're trying to do. We can't fix their underlying diabetes or end-stage renal disease or cardiovascular disease. We can't solve that. But what we can do is keep them mobile and keep them living and also not disrupting the whole family around them. I think amputation is a little bit like what we see in the stroke space, where as soon as a family member has a stroke, the whole whatever care network they have has to change and focus on them because they just can't do basic things anymore. And so it's a much bigger deal than it seems from a distance. But when you're when you see the patients, it's terrible.